draw fresh air or exhaust hot air, and then to move the air around. And I actually have another example back here. Let's see if I can grab that real quick. The last example of a fan. The inline fan. Inline fans. Ah, the newness. So these fans have recently come about within the last 15 years or so as a direct replacement for the squirrel cage fan. And just looking at it right off the bat, this is an 8-inch fan. So a benefit to this is it's already circular. Most of the things that we're going to use, ducting, hoods, they have that circular orifice. So this can have ducting placed right on it, on either end, through a wall, whatnot, and this is going to spit a lot of air. Another thing that this fan does, unlike those, is the fan doesn't have a cyclonic action. What that means is, as the air goes away, it doesn't graduate into a larger pattern like an expanding tornado. This one makes a straight line the whole way. It has riflings inside of the side of the fan, much like the riflings in a barrel of a gun that make the bullet spin. So what that does is it produces a single, perfectly straight column of air. I typically have displayed these in this formation. If I turn this on and put a beach ball on top of it, the beach ball will just sit there. Because it's such a clean column of air, there's nothing trying to push it away from the fan. It's just an upward lift. So inline fans are the new, most popular thing for cooling the room, taking the heat out of the room, and also in conjunction with charcoal filters. Now, I thought about bringing a charcoal filter in here so I could display it, hold it up above my head, but then I realized I wasn't the Incredible Hulk, so I got the beach ball version. So, a charcoal filter is used for air purification. It typically pulls out any errant dander, pollen, dead matter like skin cells, anything like that, bacteria out of the air. The way that they work is that they're ultimately a can with a screened body with another screen inside. And between the two screens are pellets of charcoal or carbon. And carbon, as we know, will absorb everything and anything that it can out of the air. So with a unit like this, allow me to use your table, gentlemen. Typically a charcoal filter is placed within the room in close proximity to the plants, because that's where we're concerned that it does its job. A fan like this then is attached, either tethered via ducting or direct mounted, like so. And so what happens is the air from the entire room is sucked through the first screen, through all of the pellets of charcoal, and into the middle body, which is just an open cavity, and then exhausted through the fan. A lot of people will just circulate it like this all day long, or you'll see these mounted on the ceiling, and their hot air exhaust is tied in through it. With these, you typically run the fans 24/7. And that's because you're trying to use it as a contaminant blocker, you know, in most cases smell or pollen. And so you never want to turn it off, because then when it's turned off, your smell and your contaminants start to creep outward. So running 24/7 is the best method with these. Another way for air purification that's pretty simple is ozone. Have any of you guys noticed the strange smell in the air in the classroom tonight? So if you're trying to detect it, it's kind of like the smell of a copier machine. And the reason for that is this ozone generator uses a xenon bulb, the little bulb from a copier machine, literally, and it has a small fan. The fan pushes air across the xenon bulb, and the xenon bulb produces O3, which is ozone, and that ozone effectively scrubs anything out of the air. A layman's way to think about ozone is it's just like an oxygen molecule with an extra particle on it. And so you've got all this ozone floating through the air. If it touches anything, that extra molecule works like hydrogen peroxide. It hits the object and tries to dissolve it, tries to burn it away. These are very popular for scrubbing the air out, but they also have a caustic nature. So you have to pick and choose your battles when using ozone over charcoal. I could use that in the home with exposure to the kids, the dogs, and myself 24/7. And other than the electricity bill, I would never know, except for the air is very clean. With this unit, it has a slightly corrosive and caustic nature. So if you had children or people in the home that were very, very susceptible to asthma problems, now I've used it and I had asthma as a child, it doesn't bother me, but if you were currently using the inhalers and whatnot, I can see how that might irritate a little bit the mucous membranes in your nose and in your throat. Also, you see I have it on a metal rack right here. Not advisable. It's caustic. It will eat every piece of metal. I have customers that put them on a stereo because the stereo's in the room. They're like, it ate my stereo. I'm like, well, it will do that. So, but where these come in very handy is they're much more astringent than the charcoal, a much more quick instant fix. So you'll see these by portals, by the front door, by the back door, the door leading out of the basement, not so much in the garden, but the door that separates the lower level of the house to the upper level as a safety, if you will. Another place where we see these commonly all the time is in delis. When you go to the deli counter, look for a purple-blue light somewhere, and that's an ozone light. And the reason why they're doing it is because they have all the different smells from the deli meats, which can attract insects if they weren't paying attention, or bacteria in the air. So they're creating a laboratory-like environment by having that really, really astringent device scrubbing all the air.
Hotel rooms.
What's that? Exactly. If you ever go into a smoking hotel room, when you check out, they wheel in one of these devices with a timer on it, let it run for 30 minutes, the maid takes it out and the whole room smells brand new again because it's removed any trace of that tobacco residue that may be lingering. I'm sorry?
How much are they?
Typically they're between $125 and up. Like a unit like this, you're looking at $1.25, $125.
Yeah. What about
Yeah.
filters?
Sir?
Filters.
The charcoal filters range anywhere from $60 to $90 and up, but then you need the fan to go with it. You need the ducting to go with it as well.
Does this thing have filters? Do you have to replace anything with that?
No. So inside of this there is a lamp. Like literally there's a light bulb and a fan, and that's all there is to this device. And the bulbs you typically would replace every 5 years because their power would be diminished, their effectiveness diminished. They would still be lighting. But as far as maintenance, about every 6 months to 1 year, you'll turn the device off, you'll open the caps on the end, and you'll just wipe it off with a handkerchief. You know, it will have dust inside of it, so you'll remove the dust just so that it's not fighting the dust inside of itself instead of fighting the stuff in the air around you. So.
What about ion cleaners?
Ion. Used to be ion was the only way for air purification. And typically the way that an ion generator works is it's pendant hung above the plants. You'll see it plugged in via cord and then dangling from a hook on the ceiling. And the way that ions work, or an ion generator works, is it creates an envelope underneath itself of clean air. So, for instance, walk over to a plant. So, if these are my plants, and I wanted to use an ion air purification system, it would have to be mounted directly above the table. Because as it comes out, the ions create a bubble. And that bubble, everything within it is negatively charged, and everything outside of it is positively charged. So it creates a little force field around the plants. Now, while this is great, it's keeping the plants clean and the air around them clean, it's a very limited exposure. It only cascades from the unit. And with ion, there's cons as well. So ion, because of the electrostatic charge nature of it, it attracts every single piece of dust from the house to the unit. So while the plants will be very good, all of the surfaces around the area will be completely dusty. So ultimately, we recommend against ion because of its limited exposure, its limited effectiveness, and possibly the negative connotation of attracting more dust to the garden environment. Yeah, and that's why you see less and less of them. You see more of these charcoal filters because they really don't interfere with anything within the home, whereas some of the other devices will. So, let's see. Moving right along. All right, so with air, there's a few other factors that I want to try and squeeze in while I have time. One of those factors is humidity. And humidity means the amount of moisture in the air. Now this is a thermometer hygrometer combo, The thermometer being the main dial, the humidity or hygrometer being the minor dial. This one you can see that it's not at 120, we're below 30% humidity in this room. It's very dry, we live in an arid environment. So a lot of people will try and supplement the humidity within their garden, faceted towards what phase of growth they're in. Which means cuttings, you're typically in cuttings you're going to have 60 to 100% humidity in that environment. Usually that's because they're recently severed, so you don't want them to wilt. Or with seedlings, they need that extra moisture to break out of the outer shell and to actually emerge. With a vegetative plant, you're typically using less humidity. Now we're talking 40 to 80% max. In veg, they like having a little bit of humidity, but too much, you could have mold and fungal blight type problems. And that's very common where you take the clones out of the clone boxes like we all did, or the machine, put the plants into veg. Since they're in veg, the door's usually closed, humidity builds, you see a lot of powdery mildew. So, something to definitely watch out for. Blooming plants want even less. Since they have so much surface area of fruit, of blossom, of leaf, then you don't want to have as much humidity because, again, you're worried about fungal blight such as botrytis, which is bud rot, powdery mildew, which looks like a gray cast. Typically we see it across all of our pumpkins and cucumbers every year. Things of that nature. You know, they could get rot, they could get rust. Rust is another fungal blight which appears like little brown spots or circles on the leaves that come out of nowhere, and those are typically brought on by high humidity. So there are pros and cons to supplementing your humidity. A lot of people will take a Honeywell humidifier from the bedroom, like we all use in the bedrooms, and put it in the garden. And while you're creating a nicer environment by doing this, you're doing other things as well. Humidity in air equals heat index. So in June or July, if it's 80 degrees in my room without humidity, by the addition of 10 or 15% humidity, now we're almost to 90 degrees because it actually holds the heat in the air, in the water molecules in the air. So you got to watch out for that for sure. Typically for humidity, I regulate it with or without the exhaust, meaning that if I'm sucking out, it's super arid and dry. If I have that exhaust fan on a timer, it does allow a little bit of evaporation from the plants to occur, which raises the humidity of the room. You know what I mean? And I would say just check your individual plant varieties to see which ones, you know, need more or less. Orchids, God, you got to have as much as you can have. Cacti and succulents, very, very little. You know what I mean? So check your directions on your seed packets, on your plant stakes, and in your guidebooks to fine-tune which plants need what humidity. As a general rule, gardening in this state, I add no humidification devices to my room. I rely on specifically when I water, the evaporation to humidify the room temporarily, and then it'll wane and go back to almost nothing, as we're seeing here, roughly 20% in this room, even with all the plants that we have and all the water. And I find that that doesn't diminish my yield, but it does diminish the amount of fungicide that I have to use. So nothing's getting funky because it's not very wet in there. Another thing I wanted to discuss today was CO2 enrichment. We discussed air and how they use the carbon dioxide, number one, primarily out of the air for photosynthesis. So in an indoor gardening environment, there are many ways to supplement the amount of this gas found within the air in the room. Some people will use a very simple method where you will use a sugar and a yeast, and the act of fermentation, when you combine sugars and yeasts, actually produces as a byproduct carbon dioxide. That's a more Mr. Wizard's kind of a way to do it, if you will. Not something I recommend. Anytime you're bringing food-grade products from the kitchen into the garden, you're inviting a whole new list of pests, a whole new set of pests and funguses to deal with. Whereas without that, I could probably troubleshoot. With that, then you're like, well, it's doing this or this, and there's some variables which are very uncommon that you could experience. Another way is with the pressurized CO2 bottle. We've seen these This is what attaches to a beer keg. This is what attaches to a soda fountain. And typically it's a 20-pound or so steel or aluminum bottle, and it's full of compressed or liquid carbon dioxide. It's typically sequenced through a regulator, which is the device that allows it to come out with gauges telling you how much is in the bottle, how many cubic feet per minute you're distributing, and typically it uses a set of tubing where, let's just use this as my for instance for a CO2 bottle. If this represents the CO2 bottle, it sits on the ground, the apparatus attaches to it, and a tube typically runs to the ceiling. Carbon dioxide is a very heavy gas, so we always want to release it as high into the environment as we can, thinking that it's definitely going to dissipate and come down through all of the plants. That way it gets the most pass-through. Another way that we've seen in the past is where people will have a bottle with a regulator and a tube, and they'll hook it up to the back of the oscillating fan, so that anywhere that that fan aims, it's actually blowing gas with it. So that's another very good method. One very common in colder regions such as Colorado, Alaska, and some of the northern states is burning propane or natural gas. The byproduct of burnt propane or natural gas is, again, carbon dioxide. So we would see many of these heater-type devices, flameless of course, which would ultimately burn these products with an element and then just allow the gas to then emanate outward. These are very good. They add to your production, to the weight of your production, but again, with every pro there's a con. If you're burning something, that's hot. If your room is already too hot, then it's not an option for you to release hot CO2 into the room. Any CO2 supplementation of any kind actually raises the heat index in the room. And the way that that works is, with a ton of CO2 in the room, it has a feel to us of a mugginess. It basically raises the heat index by holding the heat in stasis in the air. So know that anytime we supplement CO2, it's going to